I just first want to welcome and thank our speakers for joining us. We have Tajel Shah, the Chief Assistant Treasurer of the City and County of San Francisco, and Josh Goldstein, who's the Chief Product Officer at Citybase. They're going to be joining me today. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro on the webinar and why we're doing it and the topic, and then I'm going to kick it over to them for an interview, which I think is a lot more interesting than me droning on slides. I think everyone will agree on that. So just a little bit more about why we do this in the Innovation Spotlight. So just if you're not familiar, if it's your first time on an Innovation Spotlight webinar or not familiar with Marketplace.city, we're a platform to find, evaluate, and ultimately buy technology products and services focused on governments. We've got over 150 governments using it, finding and sharing not just their case studies, but how they went through sort of the process. And we like to do something that is, we want to take more than just what you did. We want to take how you've done it. So we have a process called the Clear Box, which I'll talk a little bit about more later, but we want to take, your case studies, the great government case studies and the great work that's out there, and not capture not only the issue, the solution, and the outcome, but also how you did it, the RFP, the contract, the pricing, so that we can help other governments learn from each other and leverage it. And so that's what the Innovation Spotlight's all around. It's designed to showcase other governments, showcase to other governments the great work that's going on in state and local government. For those stories that you might hear about, you might see an article about, we want to give a little bit more in depth so that you as a government can learn how you can do it as well, and how you might be able to leverage their work, as we are, as in government, a very collaborative industry. So just very quickly, housekeeping note, if you want to ask questions over on the right-hand panel, you can pop it out if you don't have, if it's not maximized. Feel free to type them as we go, and we will be answering them at the end. We'll share these slides and the recording. Will be posted, but also share directly with anyone who registered. And you can always, if you have any additional questions, email me, Andrew@Marketplace.city. And if you want to adjust, if you can see both the slides and the video feed, you can adjust that just in the panel of the two feeds in the middle. You can customize it to whatever you want. So just a little bit more about the goals of this webinar and our topic. About the topic, part of the reason this is a great one is payments really are ubiquitous across the level of government. Most governments have them. It's an interaction between residents of your city or businesses within your city. They can be a good or a positive sort of resident experience, and it's going to happen. And it's also a good example to learn from others, because I think it's frequently viewed, especially as people have brought more portions of it online, as a complex situation. There's lots of stakeholders, lots of touch points, potentially lots of departments, as you'll hear about in San Francisco. And this is a good solution that allows it to scale up and down. They really were thoughtful in that in rolling it out from the city's point of view, and Citybase is the provider. But it's something that everyone can learn from. So we want to make sure we highlight, what the issues are related to that, really talk about San Francisco's journey, the benefits, and then give, your government and other governments the information so how you can get started. So now I want to quickly introduce the speakers and the topic. So the conversation is going to be with Tajel Shah, who I mentioned is the Assistant Chief Treasurer of the City and County of San Francisco. 18 plus years in local government, much of it focused in sort of the finance treasury space, and she was the lead initiator and sponsor of this topic. And just a little bit more background before I kick it over to Josh and Tajel. This sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's a daunting task, right? Doing payments. It's got multiple systems, multiple partners. It's, as I mentioned, across over 15 departments here. There were a lot of stakeholders. So, San Francisco wanted to tackle it as they have over 300,000 payments already online, and more increasing each year. That was when they started in 2017. So they wanted to get a system that was a single system, a single payment platform to help unify this experience. And so issued an RFP in 2017 that was not overly prescriptive, really trying to get in and bring in the best solution providers and the best sort of outcome. They partnered with Citybase to do this, to integrate a single platform in the process of making it easier, not just internally on their teams, but also on residents to have one view of the customer, one view of the resident, one view of the business, and really focused on achieving their goals of having a consistent process, scalability, agile to be able to change as they added new payments and processing, and effectively targeting new key metrics in the department, like how can you stop returns or insufficient funds, the key things that both are good for saving time and resources within internally, but also a benefit to residents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts. So Josh and Tajel, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to Marketplace.city for bringing this together, and thank you, Tajel, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've said this before, but I think one of the most exciting things for us at Citybase has been to watch San Francisco become a leader in a number of government technology areas over the last few years. Really GovTech in general, but in particular payments, permitting, and a few others. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to tell that story because we've seen a lot of interest from cities, really of all sizes, not even just large cities. But why don't we start by saying a little bit more about your role with the city and county and what brought you to this topic.
Oh, great. So I am the Chief Assistant Treasurer for the City and County of San Francisco. I work for the Treasurer, who's an elected official. And the role really is about sort of multidimensional. It is the investments for the City and County. And so the City and County has about $12 billion, which is a pretty significant pool. It has airport funds and PUC, public utilities, as well as transportation. So it's fairly robust in that area. All of our banking services, and so we have around 300 bank accounts that serve all the departments that are inside of the City and County of San Francisco and supporting all of their activities, and the cash handling. So majority of that $12 billion comes in through the Office of the Treasurer and Tax Collector, through our lockbox processing, through our online payments, and as well as through our windows. And so those multi-channel pieces. And so it has that role. And then within the Treasurer's office, I also do product development, IT, and people pay and budget. And so I have what I call plumbing as well for the organization. And so I think that sort of gives us a good viewpoint, or gives me a good viewpoint of what's happening.
Awesome. So take us back 2 years. Andrew mentioned you released the RFP. What were some of the goals of releasing the payment processing RFP?
So San Francisco, in one way, was really fortunate. Before the RFP that we released, we had already, online payments. It was not, as pervasive and omnipresent in the city and county footprint as anyone would like it to be, I think. And there was a lot of anxiety and just, lack of satisfaction with how quickly and how adaptable our solutions were. So we did put an RFP out. The goals of the RFP were really to be able to sort of work with our departments where they're at. And I think that's sort of similar to how we think about customer service and where they're at. I think we wanted somebody who was going to work with us around where our departments were at. We're a diverse set of departments. Some folks are really focused on health and human services, and their technology infrastructure is up and coming and wasn't really fully developed. Some are like my organization, which has lots of technology because it's all the tax collection and it's all based on taxes and systems and implementations that make that all viable. And so that was one of the key pieces around it. Obviously being modern was another key piece. And then really being able to quickly and rapidly sort of put up solutions that our departments can manage and our taxpayers and our city businesses can really sort of engage with, and then recognize that we can quickly get to some continuous improvement. So those were some of the key pieces.
Awesome. And the next milestone, I think, was around September 2018, launched with over 20 payment types. I want to go through each of the work streams, the interface side, integrations, reconciliation, but I think something you just mentioned on the kind of implementation or project management philosophy overall. I've heard you mention continuous innovation.
Right.
And what does that mean for you, particularly in the context of coming into this with so many different stakeholders, so many different agencies?
Well, I think innovation means,
Josh,
I think something.
Sorry to interrupt you guys. We just had a request just to speak up a little bit more for a couple people. I'm all hearing just enunciate and speak up a little bit more. Sorry about that.
No problem. We will speak up more. So I think the question was really about sort of innovation and how that works. And I think, Okay, so the question was really about innovation and how we approach innovation, and I think we do a little bit of it a little differently here in San Francisco, or at least in our organization. We look at innovation in relationship not only to how are we innovating our technology, but we also look at how are we innovating our practices, how are we improving the experience for our customers, and how are we improving the experience for our staff too. And I think those 4 dimensions are really critical. And so when we go live with solutions, we really look at, we could sort of go back in and say, all right, how do we meet around customer success? How are we sort of improving that? What did we learn? And we learned a few things right off the bat. Let's make those changes. What's happening with our staff? We realized we were having some issues with, NSFs or things that really drive everybody crazy. So how do we deal with that really quickly? And so those are sort of ways that we then go back in, and so our staff are really satisfied with how they're working with the system and are able to feel more comfortable and agile in that experience. And obviously the people that are using the product are having a better experience as well. So those are sort of the multi-pronged way that we think about innovation in our organization.
And there, one anecdote that I think really captures that is our experience with the federal loan program. Do you want to maybe tell that story a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to talk about the federal loan program. I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, I think it was a great sign of our partnership. So San Francisco being San Francisco, we had over 6,000 federal employees that were furloughed due to the presidential administration determining that they were not going to have funding. It included airport workers. It included sort of staff that are here. So the mayor and the treasurer really worked together to figure out what can we do to quickly bring relief to those 6,000 employees, and so really worked with Citybase to figure out a way to do sort of an inverse payment portal, and so really create very quickly an application, a loan application essentially for federal employees to sort of request a loan from us. We got a line of credit with one of our financial institutions that allowed us to get a really great and favorable rate so that we were able to essentially give any federal worker or employee a $6,000 loan at 0 interest. Fortunately, the shutdown was ended, and so we didn't have to go through it. But if it happens again, and there's a probability that we have that in place now. And so that was a great opportunity to show both how agile our partnership with Citybase was, being able to get people exactly where they are and the pain points that they're experiencing, and using sort of the leverage of a large institution like a city and a county to work with a financial institution to get something very beneficial for people in their day-to-day lives.
That's a great story. Thinking back to the large number of agencies and number of payments that you want to solve for, I found your almost like typology of thinking about payments really interesting. Like I've heard you talk about, an agency doesn't really have anything in place right now and they need something new. They need kind of the end-to-end presentation. Mm-hmm. So not just the payment, but the lookup and the forms. And a third category maybe is like kind of a hosted payment page or like a gateway API type situation. Mm-hmm. If that's an accurate typology, can you talk about that and how you kind of thought about that in terms of prioritizing which payment types are relevant?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people that work in government recognize that no one thing is the same. And in many ways, we're in government and a lot of things are the same. And so part of it is figuring out what the same things are and what the different things are. And so one of the different things is that, our ability to put payments out so that a taxpayer or a citizen can pay them. Now, it sounds really mundane, but most of the sort of credit card industry or payment industry, you think about sort of large companies like Nordstrom or any other place, and they have one big inventory system and they put it into one big point of sale and they say, great, go ahead and integrate and make it work. We have a really different model in government. We have many, 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 many different systems, and we want to put it in different point of sale systems or one point of sale system, and how they speak to that point of sale system is really different. And so what we really were asking of our partnership with Citybase is to work with the department to sort of say, you have nothing really in a way because that's not the business that you have. And so can you help figure out a way for somebody to actually apply for a permit on your platform and then go pay for it? And that was one way. And then so they were really different. We had another sort of piece where they have a huge, big database system that all of us know about. It has all the things that they need for calculating taxes or fees. And they just need to, and they have the technology team to create a a UI, and what we really need to do is use that payment gateway that you provide and make that connection happen. And then you have other kinds of solutions which are a little bit in between, where we have the ability to put the payments in there, we want you to have the UI, and then put the payments back. And then finally, we really had a way to create with you a way for people to make donations to the city and county of San Francisco, and sort of really host a really pretty way for people that want to contribute to the well-being of their community to do that as well. So we have lots of different engagements. We didn't really prioritize them so much as sort of did the readiness factor, and who was ready and how do we get them live, versus valuing what had more profitability, or what had more footprint, or what had more transactions. And so I think we used a readiness factor as a greater indicator than anything else.
And if that interface level is one kind of work stream, then integration and what's going on under the hood is another big area. I think we've collectively learned a lot about how to set expectations to make that go faster, because you kind of we saw a lot of payments come online, and then I think we've seen and felt the momentum, hopefully increase. And I think there's a number of things on the integration side that are relevant to that. Some of the ones that we talk about a lot are, making sure an agency has a well-documented source system, test environment, transaction volume information. How has your experience been on the integration side there?
Yeah, so integration, particularly around September when we really went live with all of our applications with you, I think it was a benefit in that we had, a lot of those were already in existence. And so the rules around what were the data points necessary to make that payment happen, and what was the way that we needed to get it into the back end system was sort of in place. And I think in many ways that was a great way to start together. So starting with something where you knew the sort of what I call them sort of the language protocols, the data protocols, how are we multilingual on these different products. And then since we went live, people definitely saw that success. It is a bandwagon kind of approach. And other departments have really come forward. Maybe, it took 20 years to figure out that we should really be able to do online payments in the public space, and that's fair enough. That's okay, because we have a lot of people that still come in person, so it's not, the panacea that everyone wants it to be. And so I think we now see people coming on board, and they're a little less aware of what they need to have in place. And so I think part of what we do together is sit down with them and say, okay, what are you trying to do? What are the data pieces? What do you do with that payment right now, like on a manual way? How do we sort of think about that in an online space? What are the sort of kernels of data? How do we talk to each other, i.e. in terms of data, how do we talk to each other? And so breaking it down in those pieces, and then doing the documentation, and then figuring out that, the structure of the banking relations and those kinds of things as well. Having the banking stuff centralized certainly makes that easier as for us to serve as an entity that can help them do the banking piece and do the bank reconciliation piece as well.
Yeah. And I think a third work stream, we can think of as reconciliation, because it's not about the interface.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people may not fully appreciate how important that is to getting this type of project and making it successful. Can you talk a little bit about the back office and admin teams? Is their kind of goal in terms of getting the money to the bank accounts where they need to end up, and what are some of the challenges in terms of chargeback issues and other things that might happen along the way?
That's a great question around bank reconciliation, or reconciliation in general, and I think it goes back to sort of what we were talking about around innovation and the experience of our staff. Because I think if we don't have that done really well, the experience of the staff is really bad, and ultimately the experience for your customer is really bad too. And so what we do every day is, the money gets shipped to us from, our payment gateway, and then we distribute it based on the settle codes and the merchant IDs that we've organized with Citybase to the appropriate departments' bank deposits or bank accounts. Simultaneously, the system that Citybase has, the revenue management system, our staff go into daily, not just my staff, but any department staff that's doing the administrative part and the accounting part for their payments, and says, okay, what came in for my organization? And they do two major pieces around that, or three actually. One is they say how much came in, and let me make sure that I tell my general ledger this amount of money came in, and let me associate it to the bank deposit. And those two pieces are really essential, because what it does for our staff is it means that their bank account is automatically reconciled. And that's a huge savings for them, right? And if they don't do it quickly, then they have to do it manually. And if they don't have the bank deposit in there, they have to do it manually. So having those two keys, time and information on the back end, really is helpful. The other thing they do is they say, did something happen? That something failed? Was there an NSF? Was there a chargeback? Did something go on? And so they do that really quickly as well. And that goes back to the customer service experience, making sure we're able to deal with it. One of it is sometimes, they do an e-check and they didn't have enough money. And so we have to do the unfortunate task of telling them they didn't pay, and these are taxes and fees. And we want to quickly let them know that they didn't pay, because there may be penalties, and time is money for them from a really substantial way. So that also they have to do. And then the third piece is really making sure that the system itself, so there's an accounts receivable, you want to know, think about it from your grocery store, and your grocery store wants to know that that item was purchased, and how many remaining items do they have. Well, in the government space, they want to know that the item was paid for, and that person's paid, and they no longer have that obligation. They can go forward with what they want. And so the last piece of that is obviously making sure that the system itself that had that accounts receivable is acknowledged that that individual account was paid. And so there's sort of three really key pieces of that. We call it sort of reconciling 3 ways, or sometimes I say 4 ways. I want to make sure the bank account, the cash register, and the system are all reconciled and have all the same amount of money and the same amount of transactions.
And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, and I've heard you say it before, that government is just starting to understand digital payments. This is kind of stepping back to the industry kind of level. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think it's not, I think government is certainly picking up and understanding digital payments. I also think digital payment environment has changed a lot too. And so when we first started taking online payments many, many moons ago, the way the credit card industry and the payment gateway industry operated was very monolithic. We had this whole notion of like, what does it mean to be a card present? And what does it mean to be a card not present? And what does it mean to do this and that? And so people had to have sort of pretty decent technology infrastructures to make those things happen and make distinctions to do that. Then the credit card industry changed and said, oh, we have to have a chip. And a chip means we've changed the liability. Now, who's liable for fraud is now a little bit different. And so that changed a little bit. And then they said, oh, and by the way, we're not making a distinction between in-person and not in-person. So as those things evolved, I think government was able to more quickly and fastly able to get to doing online payments or digital payments and use multi-platformed or multi-channels on a singular platform. So I think that there's a combination of two things that are happening around the pickup in the municipal space and the government space around digital payments. It isn't just government is slower, it's also that the industry itself has moved in a different way as well. We saw with the advent of sort of different products that are out there that a lot of people use as well. So I think those two things have made it the ubiquitous of online payments that people see in their daily lives, then the expectation and the demand for people to do in the government sort of increased. And then the fact that you're able to do that technically a lot faster because of that ubiquitous meant that we didn't have to have all of the infrastructure necessarily in the same way you had to have it 20 years ago in place. And so now we can do the things that we're doing right now.
So looking forward, what do you think the future of this program holds? I have a few ideas, but curious.
What does the future hold for payments? I mean, I think one of the things that we do in San Francisco is we want to make sure that people have no wrong door. And we want to make sure that we always have an option to have a way for someone to pay at the lowest cost, i.e. free, at the most convenient point. And so one of the big decisions we made with you as well as others is, even though we have an online channel, we recognize that not everything's a credit card. A lot of things are e-check, and there's a really good reason for that. And there's generational issues around that as well, but it's really cost effective, and it's actually really easy way for lots of people to pay. And so one of the things we really did was pick up the fact that more and more people need to be online, more of our departments, but they also always have to have an e-check viable option, because I don't ever want to tell somebody, you can do it in your home, but you can only do it on your home and your credit card, and if you want to do it cheap and free, i.e. You have to come in person or do it by mail. And so that was one big thing. And so I think that'll continue to pick up because people want to pay that way, businesses and other folks want to pay that way. I think the way we have seamless integrations with across different departments, and so a business can really look at themselves and not just think about themselves from, oh, I'm paying for this permit for this building, or I'm paying for my taxes, or I'm paying for my property tax, but they're able to sort of view themselves from a sort of what we call the shopping cart perspective, right? So one business is able to see themselves in its entirety. It helps them and it helps us. It helps us because, frankly, we want to bring in that revenue as easily and cheaply as possible. It helps them because they're able to see everything at once. It also sort of creates a cohesion around that notion of we are one city. I think people they want that, they expect that, but there's a reality too that the hospital has a core competency that's different than the tax office, that's different than the permitting office, and so we do sort of operate as three different organizations that isn't inherently blind. So there's some places it can be blind and some places it can't be blind. We'd like to have that be blind on the payment side.
That's great, and that really, I think, encapsulates something that we think a lot about, which is that our product and platform are at their best when we're learning and giving and taking with you. And because what you just mentioned about where the city wants to go really ties to where we want to go as a company. We think a lot about things like session transfer. Can you start on the web or in person and finish a transaction on a different channel? You mentioned profile and stored payment and not having to rekey things. That's something we're working a lot on, and it's great to be able to do that with the give and take with you. The city has to reach everyone. Are there other things besides the ones you mentioned that you do to make sure that happens?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the fact that my notion is always that we don't get to choose our niche market. We don't get to decide that we only want to talk to people that can afford $1,000 phone. We have to speak to everybody. We speak to a small business owner, to large Fortune 100 companies, to somebody who's in their home, someone who's trying to start a business. So I think we do try to reach everybody at the different points of their pace, speak to them where they're ready to be, sort of where they're listening in some ways. So I think we'll continue to figure out how to make our channels more available in specific locations where they don't have options to sort of come to our organization, or we have worked really hard as an organization to have as many people be banked, and so we're really continuing that and the connectivity around that and able to do cheap, low cost, safe payments. We'll be continuing to work on issues around PCI and security. That is a huge thing for all government. The cost of the infrastructure to have a compliant PCI space is something that, back to your other question around why did it take government sort of so much time, is because that bar around compliance is significant, and how we structure that relationship and how we do that is also significant. And so making sure that people have trust around that security and that relationship from a financial transaction is also something that we'll be thinking about as well.
And I want to open it up to questions here, but before we do that, is there any other advice, someone who's in your role at another city, large or small, advice of how they should go about making a project like this successful in their city?
Gosh, I should have something profound to say, but I don't think I really do. I do believe in sort of creating solutions from the beginning that sort of meet a combination of needs. And I spoke about them earlier, right? Both the staff, the customers as well, and making it as sort of smart as possible from the beginning. I think there's a tendency to sort of put something up and say we put it up and feel really good about it, but then all the things in the back don't work all the time. And I think that's really challenging in any space. I think it's really hard in government space because not working all the way through the throughput has longer term ramifications and repercussions. So I think we have to balance speed with sort of being smart and making sure that we do both at the same time. And so that would be my biggest advice around starting, is to, and I don't think lots of people do this, but I think there's sometimes somebody that's like, oh, just put it up. And I'm a firm believer in don't do that.
And energy and hustle.
Right.
Clearly brought in space, which we're really grateful for.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Andrew, do we want to open it up to questions and conversation?
Yeah, so we'll do that shortly. Just one thing before we do that is, if you want to learn more. I know obviously the first person is why we want to do these webinars and interviews. It's always good to hear the first person account. It's, in my opinion, way more real than a case study, written down. But if you do want to learn more, we have all this information, including this webinar we posted on Marketplace.city. You can get the clear box, which is the outline, as I mentioned earlier, of not just the issue and the solution and the outcome, but all the information around what did the RFP look like, what's the contract look like, what's the pricing. That's all there for our government users. It's free for our government users to use, and so you can also leverage this contract as well. And that's part of the reason we want to be able to show these things. You can go learn it in one place. You don't have to call Tajel to have her spend time both running the operations she has, but then also also trying to tell you how you do this. So we have the information up there for that, including the contract, which just as an important reference is able to be piggybacked in California, and if not from there, as a reference contract for other spaces. San Francisco spent a lot of time obviously doing this, so this is important, an important use, and as governments start to use more technology and things like this, it's important to use the things at our disposal that are similar, to cooperatives and that sort of things. And it's not just for big cities. It's the scalable structure and pricing. I think you guys alluded to this. People get put off sometimes by hey, we have to do this big program. It's going to be a big upfront capital investment, and it's not going to be scalable. There's solutions out there, including this one, that aren't like that, where it's upfront, the upfront costs are minimal, and it's based on sort of transaction fees, and it is software as a service and scalable. So just encourage you to go and look to find more if you're interested. And yeah, we can jump into the questions. So we have a couple and a bunch more coming in. So let me start with the first one. Oops. There we go. Okay, so first one is, can you elaborate on the relationship and the approach with debt collection vendors since the Treasurer's Office took on financial justice and equity? Do you still use collections? And is there a different methodology, scope of work than in the impending RFP?
Great, that's a great question. The Office of the Treasurer and Tax Collector has an Office of Financial Justice that is being referenced to, and where we really look at making sure that the city government isn't sort of balancing its budget on the backs of people through fees that can impact their ability to work or perform in the city or in their jobs or in their lives. And we have done a substantial amount of work, both dealing with driver's license suspensions as well as cost of incarceration and other pieces, as well as drivers, parking tickets, and those kinds of things. We do still, our office does have the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue still, so we are the central arm for collections for the city and county. We have a very different model of collecting. Obviously, we don't have commission-based, so that makes a significant difference. We also do a lot more work around fast communication so that people can really quickly pay, know their entire payment. It's connected back to what I had said earlier about sort of having everything online in one place so people can really see what's out there for them. And then we do a lot of work around understanding if there's installment payments, or for healthcare, we're working obviously with other entities around ways to do cost containment around healthcare. So I don't think they're actually at all opposing concepts. I think our treasurer has really worked really hard to make sure that he looks at how he can use our office not only to bring in revenue, but to bring in revenue in a way that is fair and equitable, and so it has a lot of integrity with the values that the city has.
Great. So we have another one that says, can you guys share a little bit on the timeline from the first scope of work to contracting to the implementation date?
Yeah, I don't exactly recall. Maybe Joshua, you remember the exact date that we signed the contract. I know the go live date very intimately. So we went live in September. It was a pretty quick timeline. We had 20 products that had to go live. That was because our other contract was ending. And so we had to look through that. It was pretty quick. I would want to say less than 6 months. of working through everything. And that included building the relationships, so having your staff build relations with all the different departments, understanding what the specifications were, understanding and reviewing the specs from the prior entity, and then looking at how to modify and move them onto your platform, the testing, and then the training. And I think we worked a lot around training and building documentations around your solution and how it ties with our solutions, i.e. our PeopleSoft solution for our general ledger, so that people were really able to sort of, again, look at it from the entire throughput.
And just to follow up on that, what led to that 20-ish number? Was it that your readiness score, and that just happened to be the number that were there, or was there some other reason you felt like that was the right number?
Yeah, no, 20 was because that's what our old contract had, and so we obviously didn't want to have a disruption in service. Like lots of communities and government entities, we don't have, forever contracts, and so contracts go out to bid, and when we had an opportunity to go back onto the street and look at the things that we talked about earlier around what are the new kinds of ways we wanted to have a relationship, Citybase was successful. And then it was really, one, not disrupting any service, and so we had those products ready and already live. We wanted to bring those forward, bring them forward on a more agile environment and a concentrated platform that was sort of holistic for the entire city and county. And now we're at this sort of expansion period of adding more and more products onto the city and county's online footprint.
Great. So another question on how you guys, and are you able to get, sort of feedback from the residents and businesses? You touched on, the benefits of both. How do you understand how, something as squishy as the user experience is improving, or those kind of things? What types of things you're talking to the end users about?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of feedback, citizens and residents and community members are not shy when government is not doing what they expect them to do. And so we certainly hear about those fast and furious. What we've been really surprised by, though, particularly with property tax, our property tax solution that we have on your platform, is the amount of unsolicited sort of comments, tweets, whatever, about how easy it was and the use and the ease of it. And so I think that was really sort of a really pleasant surprise for all of us. It was a great way to sort of mark that we had sort of modernized the way people pay. Yes, they paid online before, but the way they had to do it wasn't as sort of seamless. With this platform, it's much more seamless. It's really easy. And so getting unsolicited compliments is sort of the highest praise you can get in any sector. And so I think that's where we live by, and those are the ones we put up on our bulletin boards.
Another question said, can you talk about the process of how, you constructed the bid or the RFP from within the treasurer's office with so many different groups involved?
Yes, developing an RFP that is sort of an enterprise-wide RFP is not easy and certainly challenging. And so one of it was we sort of had some, I firmly believe in sort of some basic guardrails. And so we did look at some of our base guardrails, or sort of key pieces, which was about the architecture and PCI and how do we want the money to flow. And so we talk a lot about, the user experience, but a lot of this is really about money movement, and that's where everyone's making their money. Everybody in this food chain around this transaction is making something. And so really looking at both the PCI compliance piece and the money movement. And so those were two key pieces for us around what we wanted. We also looked at the money movement in relationship to how quickly can we reconcile the money that came in and recognize it. So we did sort of think about those really sort of core infrastructure things that no one really thinks about in relationship to online payments. And then we swung the other direction and really talked about sort of the services that we wanted around the platform in terms of giving our departments, some of the departments that needed it, the ability to build online tools or online payments or navigations, and not just sort of an API or a connectivity through a batch file to a payment gateway. So we knew we needed to have something that supported the diversity of our departments, and so then that was the other anchor. So we had these two major anchors that sort of sat with us within the RFP. We had an interesting wrinkle. The credit card industry changed in the midst of when the RFP was on the street, and so that's when they actually decided that there was no distinction between in-person and online payments. And so we actually had to recast our RFP so we can have the versatility within our relationship that any channel would work. So that was sort of an interesting, not pleasant change for me, but I think worked out beneficially for the entire city and county. And then we also did a study, obviously, around our existing number of transactions that we had, but also the growth factor that we were experiencing over time and then expected to see, so that we could get the most competitive rate structure available to us.
Excellent. So one last question, and if there are any more, people can still share them, but one last one. What any advice that you have for people who are trying to get started on a project and have all these stakeholder groups? Any quick best practices or tips and tricks that you have, Tajel?
Best practices or tips? No, I don't. It's not. It's not as easy as one wants it to be. I do think it requires sort of. I think looking at, I would say in hindsight, I think about sort of the three things that we talked about. I think you called about the topography of them, and sort of looking at and landscaping. What are the things that you think are out there in your community or in your government space, and sort of charting out a few of those so that then you can see, and then finding your readiness ones, like which ones are most ready, and ready meaning, it has the data it knows, it has whether it's the API or a batch file, it has, it doesn't have anything, and so they're also equally ready, but they know what they want and they know their business process. So ready doesn't necessarily mean always technical. It could just mean they know what they want and they know the business process that they want to go through. And then sort of working on those really high ready ones and doing those. And as we talked about, doing those, getting those up as quickly as you can, but then really going back in and looking at that continuous improvement piece, and then sort of continuing to scale. I think once you start scaling without going back in and fixing stuff, one, you've left those entities sort of feeling not so great because they're sometimes not with the best, and then two, you sort of diminish your capacity to deal with both scale and continuous improvement. So really managing both of those pieces. And I think, we definitely staffed. We had staff in our office that sort of really spent time making sure those 20 went okay. Didn't mean that we were in all 20 of them, but we were certainly coordinating those. And we still sort of keep our pulse on each product development, not necessarily to own it, but just to sort of bring some of the lessons from one another to that new initiative. So sort of just keeping our own knowledge base growing.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have right now. So I definitely want a big thank you to Tajel and for Josh for participating today. That was really fantastic to hear the story in depth and to educate others who want to accomplish some of the same goals and who have some of the same issues. That's really important. So thank you guys so much for taking the time today. That's going to conclude our webinar, but hopefully not your journey on this process. If you do, just as a note, we will share these slides and the recording with with everyone who registered and who's here today. And you can get all this information, as I mentioned before, on the Marketplace.city, either on the San Francisco page or on the city-based pages. And of course, the Marketplace is free for the public sector, so reach out, get enabled, join. And any questions you have, please, we're here to help. You can reach out to me, Andrew, at Marketplace.city, or hello at Marketplace.city if you want it. Tajel and Josh, thank you again. Any last comments or rallying cries you want to share?
No, thank you to Marketplace for doing this. I think you're right.
Government is able to share and talk to each other, and we love being part of that. And thank you to City Base for the commitment you have to San Francisco. So thank you.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you. And thanks, Andrew.
Well, thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.